But if you're doing quantitative research, what kind of data did you get, and why did you select particular populations and so forth? They're looking for possible bias. And bias is so common that good reportage points out the perspective of the researchers or the reporters, and even lays out this bias that they have. So, okay, so first, number one, recognize any gaps of information. What should be there? If it's going to make a claim, what is the gap? And other limitations in the report on the topic. If they're looking at, let's say, a particular culture or region, did they use any of the concepts of those cultures, or are they using all these concepts from another culture to try to interpret what they saw? Who did they interview, or from whom did they get data of what they studied? Did they only interview the leaders? Did they only interview one gender? Did they include any of the children's voices, the youth's voices? Quite often they're so overlooked in research, and illustrate their perspectives. So what are the gaps of information is really, really important to identify. And even in your own research, when you write your dissertations or you write your theses, point that out. I have data about this, I saw that, and what I didn't see, and maybe would be more informative, done in another study, is this. We call that the limitations of the research. You want, number two, identify information that may also be needed for balanced reporting on the topic. Balance, as I said earlier, it might be that, you know, we didn't include the perspectives, we didn't include the concepts of the languages of the people of that region if you're doing research here on education. Are you including the concepts in Mizo that are not transliteral to English? Are you including those concepts that are in the minds of the students? Maybe in the minds of the teachers who are also Mizo? Those belong in the research, those belong in the study, because that's all affecting what's going on in this place. So it needs to be inclusive. So what else is needed for balanced reporting on the topic? So could be so many things that contribute to balance, but think about that when you're reading research and doing research. And number three, ultimately judge the quality and the significance of the report by describing its strengths and limitations. So the quality, what is good about this report? Well, I'm just trying to use something that you would relate to locally. So, it includes people of different cultures and different identities and different languages, and it's significant because they all live here. They're all in this place that I research. But the limitation is the person who wrote the research, pretend it's me, doesn't really understand the culture, thoroughly understand the culture that was studied, doesn't understand the concepts that were included in the report and recorded, but doesn't really totally understand those concepts. So I would state that in the limitations of my research. Okay, so these are all things that we need to think about when we're analyzing reports, research or not. The reports, they're claiming to provide information, and they are, but everything's limited. So when we're looking at a report, what's the reason for the report? Why did the organization make the report? Is it accountability? Are they accountable to their funders? A lot of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, have to report to their funders about what they did or what they're going to do, set their goals. Faculty have to do that. Your instructors here, they have to do that. They have to say what did they accomplish and what are their goals. So what is the reason for the report? Why were the described data selected? Why did they choose that data to make their point? Because there's always a decision there. And then, quite often, reports can have all kinds of data because there are many reasons they can't get access, or it would take too long to get to data, the time frame they're working in. But why were these particular data selected to make the point. You need to think about that when you read a report. And then think about, well, what other data would have given a bigger picture, would have supported the claims, or who cares about the claims, would have just given a bigger picture, or would I like to know more about, are important, which voices are missing? Okay, is there evidence of bias in the data description, layout, or analysis of the data? Think about how they present the data. Quite often, data are presented quantitatively in tables, so you can visually see, different heights or greater quantities in some way, if it's not heights, of one thing over another. That has a strong psychological effect on people, to see things quantified more and less. Are there other ways to present the data that aren't so comparative of more and less? Because what happens when you see more, you think, oh, that group, yeah, that group. And what do you think of the other group then? So is that even fair in the presentation to do that? One of the data that I was going to show, sets of data that I was going to show to you earlier, but I couldn't get the file going here, was a comparative study of Western human rights and Eastern human rights interventions, and I think it was the Votin study, laid out a table of data that showed that to make a point of which one had more and which one had less. Well, what's the bias in that presentation? What can you think of as the bias in that presentation? Comparing one whole area of the world to another whole area of the world, and then showing more by one area and less by another area. What's the purpose of that? What's the hidden agenda? Well, it's making one look more advanced than the other, which would, bring one to maybe think that one's better than the other. But then the researchers go on to say, well, there are all these factors on why they're different. Well, what if somebody doesn't take the time to read all this information and just looks at the tables and makes a decision? Like so many people speed read, particularly those, who are not researchers, not graduate students, and they're just in a hurry to find. Politicians are famous for this. Pick up a report and just quickly look at the data sets and look at the graphs and illustrations to make a quick decision about what happened there. So you have to be really, really careful in presentations and how people are going to use them and interpret them. So what does the reported information convey about the perspective of the reporter? In this study, this person wanted to do a comparative study of world regions, but, his agenda basically was to show one's more advanced than the other and then to try to say why. And then he comes back and says, well, it's because one is less organized and one has less resources than the other. I'm not very comfortable with that, and you shouldn't be either. You should look a lot deeper than that. And what might come up there when you're looking deeper? Well, how we interpret what's going on is different in different areas of the world. We have different norms, we have different behaviors. So in this instance, we were talking about human rights. So how we interpret that rule of human rights that was provided by the United Nations might not fit with us culturally here. So to say we're less achieved just because there's a cultural misalignment doesn't seem fair to me. Okay, here, I don't know if I'm going to get this open. Let's see. This is Writing Academically. This is a free website out here. And this gives you a really nice little, if you want to write the name down, resource for how to conduct a critical study. And can you give me a thumbs up if you have been asked to write a critical study yet? I don't know what you've been asked to do. Have you been asked in any of your courses or your research training to write a critical analysis? No, not that I can tell. Okay, so this is a skill for you to develop, and you might want to write this down. It's called Writing Academically. It's a free website, and it has all these steps. So let me see if I can click on one, and And so you can expand each one of these. What do you critically analyze? In a critical analysis, you do not express your own opinion or views on the topic. You need to develop your thesis, position, or stance on the topic from the views and research of others. So watch out that you're not just interpreting this through your thinking, your bias. What do you analyze? You analyze the theories that they have, the concepts, the terminology they use. Remember when I said, is it in multiple languages? Does it have the concepts of the culture it's analyzing or reporting about? The viewpoints, the arguments, the positions that are made by the writers of the report. The methodologies they use to collect their data, the approaches they use to collect their data, research results and conclusions they make. So this website here has all kinds of rich, let's do what critical means, since you haven't been able to do that yet. A critical analysis does not mean angry writing, rude or disrespectful comments, or expressing your views in judgmental terms of black and white, good and bad, and right and wrong, polarities. To be critical or to critique means to evaluate. Therefore, to write critically in an academic analysis means to judge the quality, significance, or worth of the theories, concepts, and viewpoints, methodologies, and research results. The quality. Evaluate in a fair and balanced manner. You're not criticizing the author so much as the work that was produced. Be fair. Be fair to that author. Maybe that author only knows one language. Maybe author doesn't know the limitations of his or her thinking. And avoid extreme or emotional language. We don't get emotional when we report in critical analysis. So it doesn't mean to call anything good or bad. It just means to find out what's missing. What's missing here? What else would help us better understand this information that's provided? And I won't go through all of these. Let's see. Let's do the last one. How to critically analyze research results and conclusions. Is this readable to you back there? Can you see it? No. Okay. All right. Then displaying it all is probably not on camera either. It's probably too small, and I don't know how to enlarge it. So I'll just quickly read out some of the things on the list. How to critically analyze research results and conclusions. The table below provides the criteria for judging the strengths or weaknesses of the results and conclusions. Did they use an appropriate choice and use of statistics? Did they use a correct interpretation of results? Always check how they analyze their data. Always do it yourself. All results are explained. Alternative explanations are considered. Was that presented in the research? Oh, there might be another way to think about this than what I just presented. Significance of all results discussed. Is this significant, or is it just something that they chose to put in the paper to fill it up to get published? Consistency of results with previous research. Do they say how their research findings relate to previous studies? Results add to existing understanding of knowledge. Limitations discussed, results clearly explained, and conclusions consistent with results. So, okay, so this is a website to help you write critical analyses, and they're very, very important when you are looking at information about humans, period, let alone human rights, and making decisions. Okay, so methods of research. So these are some methods of research that I have commonly seen, except the arts-based research as far as human rights. So studies on human rights occur with different methods based on the goals of the research. Qualitative studies are descriptive contents and experiences. We often use ethnographies. We go in and describe the whole culture of a place and try to understand it, and we describe whether or not the researcher who's writing about it has the same cultural knot. And so qualitative studies are very descriptive about the situation. In fact, they don't tell you something, they show you. This is what's in that place. They don't say, oh, there wasn't enough resources. No, they don't say something like that. They just describe exactly what the scene looks like, and they might even give pictures of it. So the reader should be able to interpret that for themselves. Sometimes they're even called interpretive studies. The readers can make their own decisions with the data there in qualitative studies. In quantitative studies, we measure with collected data, all different kinds of data, and it's often quantitatively presented. Different formulas are used for analyzing the data, depending on the goals of the data analysis. This is what I was finding out earlier today that hasn't been used here. So this is maybe new for you, or at least what I heard that it's not used here, and that's arts-based research. That came out in the United States, at least where I live most of the time, as a method of research that was really fascinating to me at first, and I am excited to use it as I can. So arts-based research uses the fine, the visual, and the performing arts, and the researchers collect data. They do a lot of picture taking and collecting of scenes. It might be, and recordings. And they listen to these recordings, and they look at these scenes, and they look at the interactions in them. They might even look at paintings or any other kind of illustrative art. And they collect their data from the actual art, and they analyze it. So we use some of this in qualitative studies. We often do depictions of scenes, but in arts-based research, you actually use art and you show the art. And what I really, really like about this is that the reader of this, if you will, or however they're absorbing the information, can interpret that for themselves. Just like when you go to the museum and you look at art in the museum, there's a lot you bring to the interpretation from you. You can interpret it yourself. So a lot of arts-based research presents art data that you look at, you hear, you feel. If you're, I've seen several theatrical performances that are data presentations in this type of research. So one thing they do is they collect the data and they show art as the data. Another thing they do is they perform to make the presentation of their research. They actually put on a performance to show you what they found. So it's all through the fine and performing arts. And some of them, I don't know how to do this yet. I know the other two parts, but I don't know how to use the performing arts to analyze the data. I think I'm pretty close to it in theatrical work, but I'm really not feeling confident yet. But that would be like what I have been doing is using theatrical arts a lot, particularly in my teacher education programs, but also with children and young adults, to have the students put on performances, to create plays, to create songs, and so forth. And I use it a lot for assessment, actually, of their learning. But I have them do that, and I look at how they're experiencing that performance, not just the outcome of the performance, but how they're experiencing that performance to see what they learned, to see if they achieved my instructional goals. I think I'll try to give you an experience with that before we part this week. Okay, so, and then the last one, I'm not sure if you have been doing this one, I think you probably are, is action research. So action research includes the participants' thoughts and perspectives along with the researchers. Give me a thumbs up if you've experienced or done action research. Okay, some of you are nodding your heads, so I think maybe you're familiar with it. This is becoming a lot more common, and it's usually a form of qualitative research. I'm trying to get I don't have a pointer, but it's usually a form of qualitative research. It's collecting data, and quite often the researcher goes in with, say, the teacher in the school and says, what are your goals here in learning about education in a situation? What would you like to find out? And so the teacher or professor is setting the goals with the researcher. And then together, they collect the data. And together, they analyze the data. And then they make their conclusions on what they found out. And most of the time this is done, this is to improve the instructional situation, the learning situation. And so it's very helpful to the practitioner, to the participant in the research, and as well as to the researcher in learning more about the situation. So this is reported out too, and it's becoming more and more common form of qualitative research. All right, so the goals of research in human rights. These are the major goals that I have seen and that I have seen across studies analyzing how research in human rights are done. So one is applied. So they collect and state the facts of a situation, a human rights situation, to improve the human rights situation. They're collecting the data. And so that's applied. They're applying the rules of human rights, and they're collecting data and stating what's happening